Good morning, Nokomis Heights, or good afternoon if you're watching this later in the day. And grace and peace to you from our God, who is with us even now in the fear, who enters into humanity in the baptism of Jesus. God who is with us all over the city as we worship in people's homes as one body. I have to admit that today feels a little bit surreal to me. Today's Friday, and I'm recording a sermon for you all to watch on Sunday, and the sanctuary is empty. And when I think about the fact that it will be empty again on Sunday, it makes me deeply, deeply grieved. Because on Sunday, or today as you watch this, we are not gathered in the sanctuary. Instead, we worship in living rooms and kitchens, around coffee tables and couches, scattered across our city in one another's homes. And no matter how much I try to spin that as a good thing, it tells a truth about the moment we are living in that I just don't like. I didn't like making the decision to pivot in this way, and it wasn't an easy or casual decision. It was a prayerful and a painful pivot made because for many in our community, it is simply not safe to gather publicly right now. And so we are choosing one another over our own comfort, and we are choosing community over ritual, and we are choosing care and love. And while it doesn't feel great, I do hope that there is some comfort in knowing that what we're doing is allowing faith to take a different shape so that we can adapt as a community to one another's needs. That is what people who are centered in Jesus do for one another. This past week has shaken us. Thousands of additional ICE agents arrived in our city, and it's worse than I could have imagined. Fear has moved into the daily lives of each and every one of us. Parents are afraid to leave their home. People are afraid to go to work, to worship. For God's sake, people are afraid to stand outside in the light of day. The brutal murder of Renee Good during an ICE operation has opened a terror that many of us felt in our bones before it was a lived reality, like this was bound to happen. Workers being tackled while doing their jobs at the Richfield Target where most of us buy our groceries. Roosevelt School where some of our own learn every day. Being terrorized by ICE as students and teachers were leaving school. School being canceled because schools aren't safe. Schools aren't safe. We are living in an occupied state, and it is terrifying. And the weight we're carrying as a community doesn't come from just one place. Some of you are holding complicated, aching feelings about what's happening beyond our borders in Venezuela. News out of Venezuela this week and last week has stirred grief and fear, memories of loss and displacement and instability that never fully leave the body. Even when hard things happen far away, trauma resurfaces and bodies remember. What may sound distant to some of us is deeply personal to others. Who we are, who we have become as a community called Nokomis Heights Lutheran Church is a community that's shaped by many homelands, many histories, and countless kinds of vulnerability. So here we are, afraid and angry, grieving and tired to our bone, and we're still choosing to worship, still choosing to listen for God, still choosing one another. And even now, as you're worshiping in living rooms and kitchens and basements, something holy is happening. While you're gathered in homes, a tiny baby, one of our newest, named Lanaya, is being baptized in this church. Water is poured, promises are spoken, God affirms Lanaya's belovedness. And even though you are not physically here, this baptism belongs to you, and this baptism belongs to all of us. It's a quiet, defiant sign that the life of faith continues, that God is still at work, and that fear does not get the final word. So I want you to picture yourself here, watching Lanaya be baptized, claimed and named and called beloved. I want you to imagine yourself speaking those promises that you will be with Lanaya as her Sunday school teacher and her mentor and her friend, that you will support her family as they raise her in the faith, that you will love her and watch her be a sheep in the next Christmas pageant, that Lanaya belongs to you just as much as Lanaya belongs to anyone. Lanaya is God's child. Lanaya is your child. Lanaya is our child. It's into this world, this layered, fragile, complicated, fearful world, that today's gospel speaks, and it's about another baptism, the baptism of Jesus. When Jesus steps into the water, into that Jordan River, Mark's gospel tells us that the sky is torn open. The Spirit descends. God's voice breaks through. It's not a gentle or sentimental scene like many of our baptisms are. The baptism of Jesus is cosmic, and it has cosmic implications. The universe itself responds. All of creation shifts. Jesus enters the water, not because he needs forgiveness or cleansing. He enters it because God is coming to stand with humanity, to wade fully into the vulnerability and fear and pain of human life. And when he comes up out of that water, everything changes. The sky rips open. God's voice comes. There's a before and an after. And after baptism of Jesus, everything changes for Jesus and for us. Before this moment, Jesus lives quietly. He's Mary and Joseph's son, very likely a carpenter's apprentice. After this moment, he's declared the Son of God, and he's driven into the wilderness and then into a ministry that brings him face to face with suffering and injustice and a government that would terrorize and finally kill him. Baptism is not some sort of a divine protection for Jesus. Baptism does not protect Jesus from what comes next. Baptism centers Jesus for what comes next. Before Jesus teaches a word or heals a body or confronts a system, God speaks. This is my beloved Son, and I'm sure pleased with him, God says. I am so pleased with him. Jesus is beloved, in other words, before. He's beloved before achievement. He's beloved before obedience. He's beloved before suffering, before he heals a single person, before he confronts a system, before he does anything. God calls him beloved. At the heart of baptism is belonging. It's God's way of saying, you are mine, you belong to me. and you are loved. And that moment that Jesus experienced at the Jordan River is not only about Jesus, and it does not only belong to Jesus. It's also about us, and that moment belongs to each and every one of us. We are baptized, each of us, into the life and the death and the resurrection, into the baptism of Jesus. During this season of Epiphany, we are taking an opportunity as a congregation to remember the core values that center us as a community. And today we are focusing on what is arguably our most important core value, and that is centered in Jesus. Which means that as a community, everything we do, from serving meals, to worshiping, to opening our building for community groups, to the piano lessons that are taught down the hall, to youth group and education and community partnerships, everything pours out of our centeredness in the person, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. To be centered in Jesus is not to hide in a sanctuary and escape the world or turn away from its pain. To be centered in Jesus is to enter into the world again and again, and to return again and again to the truth spoken over us in baptism. When fear tries to rename us, baptism centers us and calls us beloved. Martin Luther said that baptism is not something that we visit one time and move on from. He called it our daily vocation, a rhythm of dying and rising again with Jesus every day. Because every day fear pulls us off of our center. Every day the world tries to tell us who we are, tries to name us, tries to put labels on us. And each day, baptism calls us back to the water, back to Jesus, back to the voice that tells us the truth about who we are and whose we are. So hear these words for you. You are God's beloved. You are God's beloved. And that is deeply personal. And it is deeply communal. Because being beloved of God means that you belong to everyone else who is beloved of God. And that's all of us. Baptism is not only personal, it's public and it's political. Because it declares that no power, no nation, no system gets to decide whose life matters. Baptism places us in a different story, into the kingdom of God that is shaped by love and justice rather than fear and control. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who lived and led in times eerily similar to ours, described baptism as a public act of discipleship, of following, an entrance into a new kind of life that resists the values of empire of this world. For him to be baptized was to say yes to the cross and yes to community, to choose solidarity with the suffering of Jesus and the suffering of our neighbor. When we are centered in Jesus, that is what we do. We remember who we are and we remember whose we are. We are not servants to power or perfection, but we are beloved children, called to love the world as God does, even when that means suffering. Baptism binds us to one another across culture, language, nationality, and any status the world tries to stamp on us. The only mark that matters is the one placed on us in baptism, that cross on our forehead that we cannot see but we can never wash away. That matters to us now today. It really does. It really matters. Baptism refuses to let us pretend that fear is neutral or terror is accidental. It refuses to let us spiritualize injustice away. It tells us that when some in the community are targeted, the whole body cries out in pain. When some are forced into hiding, the church moves closer to those who are on the margins, not farther away. The promise of baptism is not that nothing bad will happen. It is not a divine protection. The promise is that we are centered in Jesus, in this promise of baptism, that God does not abandon us when we are most vulnerable, and we do not abandon one another either. Baptism insists that no one carries fear alone. And that's why Lanaya's baptism matters so deeply today. In the middle of fear, God is still claiming belovedness. In the middle of disruption and terror and murder, God is still making promises. In a moment when it feels like so much is being ripped apart, God is still doing what God has always done, naming life, calling people by name, and binding us together as beloved community. This is what it means to be centered in Jesus, not that fear disappears, not that danger is suddenly gone, but that fear does not get to define who we are or how we live. We return to the water, we return to the promise, we return to the voice that tells us the truth when everything else is trying to drown out that voice. We speak to one another. You are God's beloved. You are God's beloved. Baptism shapes not only who we are, but how we live. It shapes how we show up. It shapes the choices we make when the world feels unsafe. Being centered in Jesus will not always look dramatic, but it will look faithful. It will look like welcoming people into our homes, either for a moment or for a month. It will look like checking in with one another. It will look like putting our bodies between danger and someone who is vulnerable. It will look like refusing to let anyone disappear alone. It will look like bearing witness. It will look like telling the truth and staying tender, even when it would be easier to harden our hearts and go inside of ourselves and hide. When Jesus came up out of that water, the heavens were torn open, and that tear has never been stitched closed. God is still speaking, the Spirit is still moving, and baptism is still doing its quiet, powerful work, centering us in Jesus, binding us to one another, and sending us into the world with love that refuses to let fear have the final word. And that is what each of you are living out this morning, around kitchen tables and coffee tables, on sofas and chairs and living room floors. This is where we are. This is the moment we are called into. Let the waters of baptism wash over you once again, and remember who you are and remember whose you are. You are beloved, you are bound together, and you are called for the sake of the world. Amen.